right, ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We will move forward with the agenda. The session that is about to start now is on smart medicine, healthcare solutions for all. The panelists for the session are Mr. Satish Reddy, Chairman, Dr. Reddy Laboratories, Mr. Omar Ishrak, Chairman and CEO of Medtronics, and it'll be chaired by Ms. Preetha Reddy, the conference chair. So I invite Preetha to come and join us here on stage with the rest of the speakers.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this special session on using technology to provide healthcare to all. We are privileged today to have an outstanding panel to talk on the subject. Mr. Omar Ishrak, it's a pleasure to have you in the session. You do lead one of the major medical technology companies in the world, a company that delivers technology solutions to healthcare providers in 155 countries. It's a privilege to have you here. Thank you for taking the time off, and welcome to you. Mr. Satish Reddy, it's a pleasure to have you today. You're a key leader of the Indian pharma industry, and your company has been a significant player in the global generics market. You have taken Dr. Reddy's beyond pharmaceutical inputs and made it a producer of finished formulations that are widely used in large number of emerging markets. Thank you for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you. Friends, healthcare is a unique industry, and in this industry, I think demand is never an issue, but affordability and distribution are always a challenge. We're lucky today that we have Omar, who represents one of the largest global providers in the med tech industry, and we have Satish on the other side, who's a very respected and a large pharma company, and both of them have revolutionized, their industries and brought technology and pharma which is affordable, which is available, and who've spread throughout the whole globe. So I think we're lucky we've got both of them. And I'm going to get started and let Omar make his opening comments, after which, we'll try and have a lot of time for questions and answers, because I think the interaction has been extremely valuable. And after Omar, I'd request Satish to make your remarks, and then we'll go in. Thank you.
Thank you, Preetha, and thank you for that introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I had some slides, but I don't know if are they available to be shown, or I can just do without them? They will be? Okay. It's almost, in many ways, Satish perhaps should have been first, because medical technology in many ways lags behind pharma in its progression and adoption in India. And so many of the aspects that I'll present as a unique spin on medical devices, but in many ways almost unknowingly, if you look at the example of pharma, it's a track that in the end we're trying to follow, because the adoption of pharmaceuticals in India and around the world is in many ways way ahead. So with that, are we ready? I can do it without it. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah, it's okay. I'll do it with other things. So, what I thought I'd cover briefly is first sort of a general comparison of the healthcare systems in India and in the US. And from that, try to sort of analyze the respective strengths and see how the two types of strengths can be leveraged to provide better healthcare, actually not only in India, but facilitate some improvements here in the US as well. So, with that, okay, great, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So there we go. So if you look at the US, you know, despite what some people may feel about the criticisms that one hears about the U.S. healthcare system, you know, it is one of the best in the world. If you want quality care, high quality care, and you can afford it, there is almost no other place in the world you want to be in. And part of it is because even though there's a lot of complaints about access, in the end there is, in relative terms, pretty good access to healthcare in the U.S. And if you really need something, you'll get it here. Maybe not always in the same place, but you'll get it. And you'll get paid for it, and someone will pay for it. In addition, you'll probably also have access to leading edge care, which is really pushing the envelope. Where, you know, in many other countries where you can get more general care, the absolute leading edge care may or may not always be accessible. There is a tremendous research and innovation capability in the US, and as evidenced by all the medical schools, the universities, the technology companies, the levels of innovation, and we really are pushing the envelope in so many ways in advancing healthcare. This is a quest that'll never stop, because our common desire to improve our own health, no matter who you are, will never go away. And our ability to understand the human body continues to grow, and our levels of technology also continues to grow. So you put the two together and the common desire for improved health, that is a journey that will never stop. And in many ways, the US is in the forefront of that journey, although there clearly are areas where other countries lead as well. Now, having said that, you know, the cost of healthcare in the US is extraordinarily high. And I won't go into the details of that, but I could probably spend an hour just talking about why that is. Although in simplistic terms, it really is because we have a very fragmented system with no clear levels of accountability for true patient outcomes. And it's something that I think many stakeholders in healthcare, including the policymakers, recognize. But it's one that, you know, it's tough to change, because there are entrenched stakeholders, and the process of change is slow and cumbersome and not geared towards rapid focus on patient outcomes for a variety of reasons, which I don't need to go into right now. So those are essentially the challenges, if you like, of the US healthcare system, as well as its benefits. Now, if I move on to India, it's almost the reverse. You know, India actually has centers of excellence, like you know, some of the institutions that Preetha leads and others, where you really get very high quality care. But I think everyone will agree that these are, in the context of the country and the size of the country, really only pockets of excellence. The vast majority of people in India are underserved in terms of healthcare. However, if I go back to some of the advantages of the Indian system, believe it or not, the patient pay system, and although I think some levels of insurance and reimbursement should be put in place, but there is a value to the patient pay system in that it drives high degrees of efficiency and accountability on the part of the healthcare providers, because, you know, the patients are essentially consumers. You don't always want it that way, because you want most patients to have the right to good health care. But at the same time, that level of accountability drives some levels of competition and efficiency that otherwise wouldn't exist. The other thing that India has is simply its size. There are large patient cohorts. It's a place where you know, you can do studies. Not only can you do studies, but through practice, healthcare gets better, because you do more procedures than anywhere else, and you do them more often. And most of these procedures, which are often surgical or other interventional procedures, you get better if you do more. And even if it's not that, you get better at diagnosing if you see more. So the volume and the size of India has all kinds of advantages, which I'll share with you in a minute. Now, the challenges. First of all, the overall spend in healthcare is alarmingly low. I mean, less than 2% of GDP is not something that any country deserves. Now, whether it's government funded or private funded, you know, that's a secondary question. The point is that I think everyone will agree that enough money is not being spent. And so investments have to be made in healthcare for India. And I'll come to that point a little later in more detailed terms. Now, in addition to that, there is an inadequate referral system. There is no an established system of primary care, secondary care, tertiary care, a system through which people can go to a doctor and depend on the right type of diagnosis and then referred to the right place if they cannot properly diagnose or treat. That type of system is at best haphazard and often based on personal views and opinions and referrals from friends as opposed to the medical community. That is not a way in which you can develop a healthcare system. So a referral system needs to be developed. And then finally, although the patient pay system has its own benefits, in the end, that's not a scalable model. And you need some level of insurance or reimbursement that is greater than what it is today. The systems like that have to be developed. Probably more government spending on healthcare, or at least some level of private industry or insurance company investment is probably essential for this type of system to scale. Now, if I put all of this together, and I just look at the Indian system and the US system, and just ask ourselves how we can help each other, well, in summary, the US can actually help with the development of a systematic infrastructure because we have experience in doing that. We have experience in developing an infrastructure for healthcare, which is well established here in the US. We have physicians, and we can train physicians. And training physicians, especially with India, I think the US is particularly well placed because of the large number of Indian physicians who actually are here. I recently spoke at the American Association of Physicians of Indian Origin. And there's a large number of members of highly qualified physicians. I spend a lot of time talking to key thought leaders and practitioners of medicine in the US, and I can tell you a lot of them are of Indian origin. A fact that you may not know, but over 60% of medical school students and graduates over the past few years are of Indian origin in the US. So there is a natural tie there. And that tie, could lead to training. There's a lot of people, a lot of such practitioners in the US who want to do this, but don't have a system to depend on so that their efforts can be scaled in a way that it makes a difference. It instead becomes a one-off visit to their relatives or whatever, and then do some sort of voluntary work, and they feel good about that, which is great. But if you could only channel that energy in a more systematic way, you could probably achieve a lot more. And then finally, although I'd be the first to say that the US healthcare policies are not perfect, but we've got experience. We've got experience, and we're rapidly trying to innovate and make it better in a fairly large country, although nowhere near as large as India, but large compared to many European countries and other such countries. It really is one of the largest delivery systems of healthcare there is in the world, given the fact that we've got high levels of access. And so there is experience here with respect to policies and what works and what doesn't work and what one should avoid. And translating that to help India in its own progression is something that the US can help with. India, on the other hand, because of the reasons that I stated before, has actually high degrees of efficiency. Accountability, a system through which, and there are many examples in India, a system through which continuous improvement in the delivery of healthcare has been made because it's been forced, because of competition on different healthcare providers. And the levels of efficiency are much higher. The decision-making capability is much quicker. Groups of doctors can get together and make decisions. Now, that's good and bad. It's good in the sense you can make decisions, but in many ways that happens because the regulatory framework is weak. And so, bad decisions can also be made. So, the right balance needs to be found, but I do want to stress that there is experience of moving healthcare forward in India amongst the providers there in a large number of cases. And then finally, the point that I made before about the patient pools that are available in India. Not only is there a need just to localize some of the data, but beside that, on a more generic level, acceleration of clinical trials, and just improving healthcare by sheer practice in volumes, that patient pool concentrated in one place, that the demand is there, that's not easily available everywhere else, especially when you link that with the pockets of excellence, which are not like one or two, but many. It's just small compared to the size of India, but certainly not small in absolute terms. So I think these provide a framework through which we can think about collaborative models. Now, the important thing about collaboration, though, as I think Mr. Pilot pointed out, that India is a very complex country. It's a big country. And there isn't going to be a magic switch that we can flip and try to do everything in one fell sweep because of all the points that he made about the complexities, the differences, and so on, and the variety of maturity in different populations. So, one guiding principle that we're trying to sort of follow is that let's start with the community in a region and build it out end to end. Because true value in healthcare is achieved when patient outcomes are actually improved. Value in healthcare is not achieved simply by doing diagnosis. You have to have the entire infrastructure, because if you simply diagnose and then you don't know what to do with that patient, I don't know if that really, it may achieve something, but it doesn't achieve a lot. So going end to end, all the way from screening to diagnosis to treatment to post-acute care and follow-up is what creates value in healthcare. Something that's not only financially valuable, but it's valuable from a patient perspective, because that's why the population enters the healthcare system. So selecting a partner with whom you can build out this end-to-end model, and that could be a provider, it could be a government, it could be a region, it could be a community. But it has to be something that's holistic, and a partner who is committed to providing that end-to-end solution. Second, healthcare is complex. It's very complex. It's not even fully understood. All the sort of nuances of the human body and all the different conditions that happen. It varies per person, and it's good to look at averages unless you happen to be the outlier. So you cannot take healthcare very simplistically. It's not necessarily a consumer type market, because the penalties for making a mistake are massive. And so you have to be very careful. And the knowledge base is unique. It has to be developed because it truly is unique almost to an individual. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't groupings and cohorts and so on, but it has to be done with a certain thought process in mind. And because of this complexity, and because of the line of sight to outcomes, it is better to select diseases, specific diseases, and go deep in them. And make sure you move the needle in that disease rather than try to do all diseases in one shot, because, it's different. Every disease actually is quite complex. So given these two sort of guiding principles, here is a proposal that we're trying to work on that, it's certainly not simple, but is a starting point. And we call that the hub and spoke system. It's almost obvious, but it's one that could do with some development. Now, I know that Apollo hospitals, for example, and others have similar thought processes, but if you link that together with cooperation and collaboration from expertise that resides in the US, you could probably accelerate some of this. Very simply put, a hub and spoke system is one where you have a hub, which is a place for advanced care, and advanced is relative, but it's one that probably does surgeries and fairly complex procedures. And then that hub is serviced by spokes. And those spokes are, in the beginning at least, diagnostic and screening centers. And you need them simply because of the scale and breadth of the geography of the country. That, you simply cannot expect people to show up at hubs. You need to have these collection centers. And you cannot have too many hubs, which are very expensive, which, a mistake that exists in the US, where, frankly, there are too many hospitals. In the US, even in the US, believe it or not, if you talk to the HHS here, the Health and Human Services Office in the US, they'll tell you that one of the biggest problems here is actually the rural population in the US. And I think at least this audience realizes the rural population in the US is like a little grain of sand compared to what it is in India. And so, having this kind of a spoke system is essential to reach the levels of population that exist in that country. The trick here is to connect the spoke and the hub. and build a referral system in between, and each spoke and each hub understands their complementary attributes that they have in this path. What we can do is to help the training process. Help the training process, help the infrastructure creation process in both the hub and the spoke. Of funding if necessary, but more importantly, establishing the right types of technologies and capabilities in both of these centers. And trying to use our general knowledge of referral systems and policies to apply to these hub and spoke systems. So again, a simple concept, but a focus has to be there in trying to attain it, and a clear goal has to be made, has to be there as well. A disease focus, I think, is essential, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Again, a hub where a particular disease, say, for example, cardiology is a specialty, and spokes where cardiology, diagnostics, and so on are the specialty by themselves. Now, if you take this to the next level, once the basic center is established, you can really then pick it up to a point where the relative merits of the two systems can really be leveraged to create a real differentiator in India. And that is, if I start with the spoke, with the hub, what one can do is, as the system is established, elevate the hub to perform higher and higher and more advanced therapies and technologies. You know, take the latest leading edge stuff that's in the US, move them to India, because the hubs, like I said, they're pockets of excellence. There are doctors who are eminently capable of not only executing on those procedures, but even training others. At the same time, that'll free up their time from doing the standardized work, which can then be translated to the spokes. So in that way, the spokes also upgrade themselves. They do basic procedures, not only screening and diagnostics, and that frees up time from the hubs, and the hubs then go to the next level of therapy development, which then puts India rapidly as a leading edge provider of healthcare. Now, in addition to that, if you take it to the next level, take advantage of the size and scale. Use the fact that you now have these advanced centers of therapy and use them for future clinical trials for things that aren't even developed yet. And again, given the size and scale and the population of India, that becomes a very attractive model. And with the spoke, not only can you do interventional procedures, you now reach out to homes and do remote patient monitoring and do more preventive care and chronic disease management. And here are just some examples, which I think this audience is completely familiar with all the possibilities that can happen. But the warning that I have on this page is that don't start with that page, because there's no end of solutions you'll dream up of. But unless you apply them to a specific target, it'll be highly inefficient deployment. So start with the prior pages, describe the problem, select the disease, fix the infrastructure, and then do this kind of stuff. This is clearly there. But for a technology community, it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that you just, put a bunch of technology there and everything will be solved. Think of the problem first. And I think that's what I would say with respect to this page, which I think is most familiar for you. Now, I'm going to move on now to the next topic, which is kind of related. This is going to one level below in terms of care beyond advanced centers. This is an example that we've done for the underserved in India, and this is a fairly kind of a not very fashionable disease, but it's one that's extremely debilitating if you have it, and that's chronic ear infections. It is almost unheard of here. Yet in India, there are 80 million people who have untreated chronic ear infections. Small percentage of the population, but 80 million is nothing to, sort of sneeze at. And over 60 million of them are hearing impaired. So what we've done, for example, in a program is worked with a community to provide local healthcare workers who do the diagnostics, do simple screening, do simple treatment, and then refer them to a hub, which is in that local area, and the patient then gets treated in the hub for more complex procedures which may require other forms of intervention. This is a very simple model. The cardiology model is a scalable, well-known model which requires advanced training. This is a simple model. And the reason I show this is because this thought process of a disease and scaling it, a spoke and a hub, that concept can be applied at different levels. And in India, almost no problem is too small, simply because of the size of the population is so big that you can scale almost anything. I mean, there are countries with populations less than 80 million people. And so the fact that this is not only a business opportunity, but certainly a societal opportunity goes without saying. And again, this is one example. There are hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of such examples that you can pick. But the important point here is to pick a disease and go end to end. Now, if I move on to the next subject, which is really about Make in India, I'll start with a statement that maybe not phrased correctly. I'm stating here that India as a center for global manufacturing for medical technology is not realistic, but more importantly, it's not necessary. And it's certainly not the priority. And if I follow the pharma example, pharma got established by serving India first. And for even Indians to think about exporting technology out of India when there's such a huge need in the country, I think is wrong. Because by serving the needs locally, you can create enough economies of scale that will justify manufacturing. You'll get us, as a global medical technology company, to pay serious attention to India if we can have a pathway to delivering healthcare in India, rather than saying that, look, it's so cheap and cost efficient, you can export it around the world. I can tell you, every government I meet tells me the same story. And they all have reasons. They may not be as big, but they all have incentives and this and that, and that they go put a factory there and you can export. Well, in India, you don't have to do that. Just serve your own people. And you've got plenty, big enough market. And if you have a line of sight to that, we will put a factory there, but not for export necessarily. I mean, that might come, but really to serve the Indian population by itself. And on that basis, partnerships, I think, are very important. And one such example that we've sort of looked at is working on cath labs. And really the partnership here is more about how do you provide access, how do you provide the training, very much like what I talked about in the cath lab example, except this one is a partnership that we're thinking of with some states in India, where the state makes available the government-run facilities under some kind of a PPP opportunity. The state does the reimbursement for care. That means pays the providers what's necessary. The state drives adoption. We provide the training, we provide the infrastructure, and through that we get assurance that the products that we put over there will be used. And if they're used, we will put a factory there. If they're not used, then we'll know why they're not used, and we'll go fix that problem first. So this kind of partnership, which the cath lab as an example, is one that we have to pursue. And the context I will give you is something that comes from a different country. If you take, two examples, and I'll take Russia as an example, and I compare Russia because it'll give you the potential of what's possible in India. Here's an example of a country that's got 200 million people, like a fifth or less the size of India. Yet, there was a focus by the government to treat one aspect of heart disease, only one aspect, acute coronary syndrome. This is not even all heart attacks. It's just one type of heart attack, acute coronary syndrome. And the government said that, to kind of treat these patients, you need a certain infrastructure through which patients, when in a hospital, can get a stent put in a certain amount of time and the appropriate treatment provided. And the government we, together with the government, arrived at a partnership together with a third party that we would put a factory in Russia to make stents for guaranteed deployment in Russia for those instances, and we would help do the training and creation of that infrastructure within the existing government hospitals, as long as the government was willing to deploy the products that were made in Russia in agreement with them. Just that alone, remember what I'm talking about, a relatively small country in population compared to India, one small disease, believe it or not, the amount of the business opportunity that was apparent to us from delivering that was enough for us to justify a factory. Just one small disease in a small country, if scaled properly, is a big enough business opportunity. India is 5 times the size, and there's many more diseases you can treat. There's no end of opportunities like this. And by the way, there are more physicians locally available in India than there are in Russia who are highly trained. And so this is the kind of thing that we can do, and it can be done. There's another example in China, which I won't dwell on, but very similar. We did this with a state in China, with a city, in fact, the city of Chengdu, relatively small population, but a willingness from the government there to do the deployment. If they're willing to do the deployment, we'll help with the training, we'll put the factory in place. If that isn't there and say just build a factory and export to the whole world, that doesn't make any economic sense for us or for anybody. And I'd argue that that's not the right thing for that country. Let me finish just by stating something that I strongly believe in. I mean, for a multinational like us, going to a place like India and making a difference is not an option. I mean, this is one of the largest, especially in medical technologies, one of the largest untapped opportunities that there is. 1.3 billion people, and even in the premium segment, a population who can literally afford to pay for the care out of their own pockets. Even in that population, therapies that are well established in the US and other Western countries, well established for decades, are available to 5 to 10% of that population, not the entire population. So the opportunities are enormous, and then as you work your way down to lower and lower levels of the economic pyramid, sometimes doing it in parallel and sometimes doing it in serial fashion, this is undoubtedly, in my mind, the biggest untapped opportunity there is in healthcare, in medical technology. There's absolutely no question about it. And so it's a big opportunity and certainly a business opportunity, but more importantly, a societal opportunity and a responsibility for all of us. So with that, I thank you very much, Preetha, for inviting me here, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be delighted to take questions later. Thank you.
Very good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Preetha, for your kind words of introduction. She's always extremely generous in words of praise, so she and her sisters too, Sangeeta and Shomna, always very generous with your praise in the words of introduction. So I think it's a good thing that Omar started this presentation because he gave a good overview of the entire healthcare and also the framework for collaboration. So one, it's evolved in the US. What are the challenges when it comes to India, and what could be the collaborative framework by which things can be done, and few models. So I agree with most of those, right? So that's a good part. So my comments will probably be in two parts, right? So the first part, I also wanted to give a frame in terms of, so what happened in the past in terms of the evolution of the relationship between the Indian pharmaceutical industry and the US pharmaceutical industry. So if I wind back to almost, say, 30 years back, right? So that was the time, if you see it from the US point of view, it was like Omar showed in his slides, it is a high cost of healthcare in the US. There was an aging population. And if you look at the supply chain at that point of time, in terms of pharmaceuticals at that point of time, the active ingredients, the APIs, used to come in mostly from Europe and Japan. So those were the big suppliers of raw materials into the US, who would then finish and then sell in the US market. So if you see it from the Indian point of view, there were two defining moments, I believe, in terms of how the industry came into being. The first was clearly in the 1970s. I would say exactly the year 1970, when the Indian Patents Act was promulgated by the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. What it said was that it won't recognize product patents, but it will. Our founder, chairman, and my father, Dr. Reddy, for example, he used to work in a public sector enterprise. He became entrepreneurial, started a bulk actives company, and in a very short span of time, looking at off-patent products, that's what we used to export into the US. That was the very beginning of how Dr. Reddy's started. But very quickly it moved on, into forward integrated into formulations, and then came the next defining moment, which is in the early 90s. That was the time India liberalized. At that point of time, 60% of the world pharmaceutical market, and we decided to invest into this market. So that was the beginning in terms of, how Dr. Reddy's also made its move. So if you see what happened from that point of time, right? So it was then the opportunity which presented itself in terms of huge number of products going off patent in the US, and Indian companies, as an example, Dr. Reddy's, would then look at their process development capabilities, which is essentially chemistry skills. A lot of talent, very good manufacturing systems, high quality. So using these strengths, Indian companies then made their foray into the US generics market. What enabled the generics market in the US? There used to be, I think sometime in 1984, there was a Hatch-Waxman Act which was promulgated, which also in one of its objectives helped generic medicines to be, to give it more penetration to the US. So that was that act in 1984. So if you look at these happenings and all that, I mean, just in a short span of time, you know, what used to be in the early 2000s, generic penetration in the US, which just used to be about 50%, today it's almost about 88% generic penetration. So if you see the opportunity and translate it back to Indian companies, and that was huge. Just to give an idea of what it does, you know, the whole evolution takes place. So this relationship, you know, over the past 30, 35 years, you know, was very, very fruitful in terms of the supply chain from the Indian companies, in terms of huge savings for the US healthcare system, also thereby enabling, you know, savings. That's something which really worked out well. So let me go to the second part, which is, you know, so how is it at the present point of time? Because in whatever I said so far, it was all about access to healthcare. It was about affordable medicines. That was really the story of the past 35 years. Even today, this issue of affordable medicines continues. It continues in India. It also continues in the US. So if you see the generic companies like us again, and various top leading companies of India, so we continue this story of the generics. So it's not just about products just going off patent. It's also into drug discovery, because mind you, there's no grants coming in from institutes or from the government at this point of time, like it happens in the US. It is completely with the earnings. So that's how, you know, we have taken, you know, the industry. Now, just like I said, right, at this point of time, if you see the challenges, companies have moved up the value chain. They're doing more innovative things. And then there are also challenges, right? So what you would really see in the news these days, within a year, everything will be sorted out. So that's one level of challenge. There are also issues in terms of policy which tend to be very, very challenging. You know, so that's something we're also grappling with. And that needs to really, you know, penetrate. I'll just come to that just in a bit. So if we now get to the real topic, which says that from a pharmaceutical industry perspective, US companies to invest into India. But there needs to be a clarity. I think the important point is if there is clarity on the policy framework, it can attract more investments, more collaborative issues that we face, because as you know, Special 301 is one of the issues. Again, Dan, you're quite deeply involved with this. So this also is something like a help, you know, meet the ultimate objective, which is access to affordable medicines. So that's one point. Second thing is just like the collaborative models that Umar, resources behind research creates the most innovative drugs anywhere in the world, and it still continues. There are challenges in terms of, you know, the numbers and all that, but this is still the hub of innovation. The question is, if you see it back in India, there are also capabilities. Like I started off saying, there are companies who still do drug discovery today. They're resource constrained because there is not really much support coming in from the government or from private equity at this point of time. So in terms of collaboration, there are plenty